The courtroom buzzes with anticipation, tension thick in the air. The sharp click of shoes on marble echoes as Judge Richard Posner, an icon in the legal world, raises his gavel. His reputation precedes him. Even the most hardened politicians know that his questions are not just probing, they're fatal. Posner looks directly at Representative Jasmine Crockett, his piercing gaze cutting through the room. The audience holds its collective breath. This is the moment everyone has been waiting for. Posner's voice rings out, cold and calculated, his words dripping with authority, but laced with disdain. Are you really prepared to defend such reckless positions, Ms. Crockett? His eyes narrow, daring her to speak. The room goes deathly silent. Every ear is straining to catch her response. The weight of the moment presses on her, but she doesn't flinch. She knows this is no ordinary debate, this is a showdown. And she is ready. Her voice, calm yet resolute, fills the room. I am prepared, Your Honor, not just to defend my position, but to challenge your understanding of the very values this country was built upon. A murmur ripples through the room. Those around her glance nervously, unsure of how this will play out. Posner's expression falters for just a moment, a flicker of disbelief. He's heard countless defenses in his career, but this was different. There's an edge to her words, a fierce clarity that demands attention. The energy in the room shifts. Suddenly, the tables aren't just tilted. They're turning. Crockett's words hang in the air like a challenge, a gauntlet thrown at the feet of a towering figure who never expected to be questioned, not like this. Posner leans forward, his demeanor now cold, testing. You think you can teach me something about American values? About the law? Crockett stands tall, her eyes unwavering. Not teach you, Your Honor. Remind you. A collective gasp sweeps through the room. Even Posner, known for his unshakable confidence, seems to hesitate for a heartbeat. But what happened next stunned even Posner himself. Judge Richard Posner is a titan of the American legal system. For decades, his judgments have shaped the very fabric of law. His intellect is legendary, his influence undeniable. The halls of justice reverberate with his every decision. When he speaks, America listens. Posner has earned his reputation as the ultimate authority, an unassailable figure who defines what's just, what's legal, and what's right. But standing across from him is a new kind of challenger. Representative Jasmine Crockett, the youngest African-American woman in Congress, has spent her career not just questioning the system, but dismantling it. A fresh voice in a sea of political titans, she's known for her relentless advocacy for the underserved, the oppressed, and the forgotten. Where Posner represents the status quo, Crockett embodies change, bold, unapologetic, and willing to confront the uncomfortable truths that others avoid. This isn't just a courtroom. This is America's ideological battle being played out, right before the public's eyes. The stakes are higher than just who wins this debate, this is about the soul of the nation itself. For too long, the voices of everyday people have been drowned out by those who sit in power, whether in the legal system, corporate boardrooms, or government. For decades, decisions have been made by people who have never known the struggles of the people they govern. And now, Crockett stands as the embodiment of the people's voice, daring to challenge the establishment. The room is electric, not just with the weight of legal jargon, but with the energy of a nation on the brink of change. This is a moment that will be remembered for generations. The outcome of this confrontation could define the future of the country. What happens here could reshape the entire landscape of American law and politics. If Posner wins, it's a reaffirmation of the old guard, the entrenched powers that control the system. The elite will remain unchallenged, their voices echoing louder than those of the marginalized. But if Crockett succeeds, if she can break through the iron grip of the establishment, then this marks a turning point. It would signal that power is shifting, that the people have a new champion, someone willing to fight for the values that have been neglected for far too long. This isn't just about ideology. It's about who gets to decide the future of America. And the country is watching. Political commentators, activists, and citizens from every walk of life have tuned in, their eyes glued to this moment. The stakes couldn't be higher. If Posner is allowed to maintain control, it will be business as usual, policies that favor the wealthy, laws that oppress the poor, and a legal system that rarely holds power accountable. If Crockett wins, however, it could ignite a wave of reform, a reckoning with the systems of injustice that have plagued this country for centuries. The weight of history hangs in the balance. The moment isn't just about one debate, it's about the future of justice in America. The world knows this is bigger than them. The people know this is their chance to be heard. But while the nation watched, no one truly knew the weight of Crockett's personal journey to this moment. Judge Richard Posner is a man whose name has become synonymous with authority in the legal world. For decades, he was a fixture of the United States Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit, a position that granted him unparalleled power. His influence, unmatched by most in the judicial system, has shaped countless rulings that have rippled across the country, altering the trajectory of American law. To his admirers, he is a brilliant legal mind, a man whose decisions are based on cold, intellectual precision and an unwavering commitment to the rule of law. To his critics, however, Posner represents the very best and worst of the old guard, an icon of establishment thinking, an unyielding force that has long resisted change. Born in 1939, Posner was educated at some of the most prestigious institutions in the country, including Yale Law School. His intellectual prowess was evident from the start. By the time he reached the bench in 1981, he was already regarded as one of the brightest legal minds in the country. But with intellect came arrogance. Posner's belief in his own intellectual superiority was so absolute that it bordered on condescension. In his mind, his reasoning was not just right, it was beyond question. Over the years, Posner's decisions reflected this mindset. He prided himself on taking a pragmatic approach to the law, focusing on what worked in practice rather than adhering strictly to legal formalism. In many ways, this made him a trailblazer, a man who valued efficiency over ideology. But his critics saw a different side, one that rejected nuance, dismissed social concerns, and placed the law above human empathy. His decisions often favored the powerful, the corporations, the wealthy, the status quo, while failing to address the systemic inequalities that plagued the very people whose lives the law was meant to protect. One of the defining characteristics of Posner's career was his disdain for those who challenged the established order. To him, they were idealists, political opportunists, or simply naive. When new voices, especially those of younger, progressive politicians like Representative Jasmine Crockett, began to rise, Posner saw them not as fresh perspectives, but as dangerous disruptions to the stability he had spent his life defending. He dismissed them as political amateurs, untested in the hard realities of the law. Crockett, with her bold critiques of the system, her refusal to back down in the face of power, represented everything Posner believed was wrong with the new generation of lawmakers. They were impatient, uninformed, and unwilling to appreciate the subtleties of legal thinking. In Posner's eyes, they were a threat to the very fabric of the judicial system, an unwelcome force that, if allowed to flourish, would erode the integrity of the legal profession and the country itself. But it wasn't just his disdain for younger voices that made Posner such a formidable antagonist. It was his rigid belief in his own moral superiority. To him, the law was an unyielding structure that could not, should not, be bent for the sake of political convenience. He saw himself as a guardian of that structure, a bulwark against what he perceived as the rising tide of emotionalism and populism. In his world, law was the ultimate authority, and to question it was to question everything. This unwavering stance made Posner unflinchingly confident, perhaps to a fault. His reputation as a legal titan made him untouchable in the eyes of many, and his long history on the bench only added to his air of invincibility. He had authored landmark decisions in cases that ranged from antitrust law to civil liberties, many of which were celebrated for their intellectual rigor and practical application. But while Posner's brilliance was undeniable, his blindness to the shifting tides of politics and public sentiment was becoming more apparent with each passing year. As the political landscape evolved, Posner's approach to the law seemed increasingly outdated. While he clung to an interpretation of justice rooted in the 20th century, the world around him was changing rapidly. Issues of racial justice, economic inequality, and systemic reform had become central to the national conversation, but Posner, stuck in his ways, struggled to reconcile these movements with his understanding of the law. He rejected the idea that the legal system could, and should, adapt to meet the needs of a more diverse and complex society. His decision-making, often described as coldly logical, became a source of frustration for many who believed that law could not be separated from the lived experiences of the people it was meant to serve. In a country where social justice movements were gaining momentum, Posner's approach appeared tone-deaf, out of touch with the realities of modern America. And then, there was Jasmine Crockett. She represented everything that Posner could not, or would not, understand. Her rise to prominence was fueled by the very ideals that Posner had spent his career resisting, a fierce commitment to justice for the marginalized, a belief that the law should be a tool for change, not a shield for the powerful. She had no fear of challenging the status quo, no hesitation in calling out systemic injustices, and no patience for the kind of legal formalism that Posner had long championed. Crockett wasn't interested in preserving the old order, she was interested in tearing it down and rebuilding it with a new vision, one that placed the needs of the people at the center of the conversation. As the two faced off, it became clear that Posner saw this confrontation as more than just a legal dispute, it was a battle for the soul of the country, and in his mind, he was the only one who could keep it from descending into chaos. But in the face of this towering figure of the law, there was one force rising that would not back down. Representative Jasmine Crockett's story begins in the heart of Dallas, Texas, where she grew up in a neighborhood marked by poverty, crime, and systemic neglect. The streets where she played were not the ones lined with promise and opportunity, but ones shaped by the harsh realities of the American underclass. Yet, even as a child, there was something different about Jasmine. Even as she navigated the rough edges of life, she could never quite silence the voice inside her, the one that told her that the way things were wasn't the way they had to be. Her parents, both hard-working individuals who did their best to provide, would often tell her, "You're going to do better than us." But better didn't just mean getting an education. To Jasmine, it meant doing something meaningful with it, something that could change not just her life, but the lives of everyone who had been written off by society. The spark for her journey to public service was ignited during her high school years, when she saw firsthand the disparities in education, healthcare, and employment that seemed to define her world. She was always the kid who asked, why? The one who couldn't accept inequality as just the way things were. As she watched friends and family members fall victim to the broken systems around them, her sense of injustice grew. And with it, so did her determination. Her decision to pursue law was not born from a thirst for prestige or accolades, but out of an urgent need to understand the systems that held people like her back. While many around her were content to accept the status quo, Jasmine wasn't. She saw law school not as a gateway to wealth or fame, but as a tool to wield against the forces that perpetuated inequality. She wanted to fight back against the structural injustices that left people like her family, and millions of others, trapped in cycles of disadvantage. But the path to law wasn't easy. At every turn, she encountered obstacles, both personal and professional, that could have stopped her in her tracks. She faced the systemic racism that is woven into every institution in America, and in particular, the legal system. It was in those moments, when doors were closed in her face or when her voice was drowned out by those who believed she didn't belong, that her resolve was solidified. This was a fight worth having. If she could just make it to the table, then maybe, just maybe, she could change the rules. By the time she graduated from law school, Jasmine had already faced more adversity than most people experience in a lifetime. She struggled to pay for her education, working multiple jobs just to make ends meet. She dealt with the isolation that comes with being one of the only black students in a predominantly white space. Yet, despite it all, she persisted. The law, she knew, was her weapon. And with it, she would do battle against the inequities she had seen all her life. But her journey was far from over. While she had achieved personal success, she was quickly learning that the systems she had hoped to dismantle didn't go down easily. Upon entering the world of politics, she was faced with the same tired arguments and old power structures that had kept communities like hers in the dark for decades. Despite her accomplishments and the strength of her convictions, there were still those who didn't take her seriously, who dismissed her as a young firebrand or a political amateur. It was a harsh reminder that the world she was fighting to change wasn't interested in listening to her, or people like her, unless she proved herself capable of playing by its rules. But she wouldn't bend. She wouldn't become one of the establishment voices just for the sake of getting along. She could see the cracks in the system, the ways it was rigged to benefit the few at the expense of the many. And that made her more determined than ever to push forward, to challenge it all. Her first years in public office were defined by a series of battles against an often unyielding system. Jasmine fought tirelessly for criminal justice reform, advocating for policies that would reduce mass incarceration and ensure fair treatment for people of color. She stood firmly against the corrupting influence of corporate money in politics, even when it seemed like no one else dared to speak out. Every time she spoke, she reminded those in power that the voices of the marginalized mattered, that their stories, their struggles, their lives had a place at the table. But it wasn't just her policy achievements that set her apart. It was her ability to connect with people. Jasmine wasn't just a lawmaker, she was a voice for the voiceless, a fierce advocate for those who had been forgotten. When she spoke, people listened. They knew she understood their pain because she had lived it. She was more than a politician, she was a lifeline for communities that had been abandoned by those in power. Still, her journey was not without sacrifice. There were personal costs to the fight. The long hours away from her family, the isolation that comes with being one of the few in the room who truly understands what it means to represent the people, and the constant battle against the forces of complacency and privilege. But Jasmine never let up. She couldn't afford to. She knew that for every inch of progress she made, there were those out there who would do everything in their power to stop her. Her ability to fight, against a rigged system, against the cynics, against those who thought they could silence her, was rooted in something much deeper than political ambition. It was rooted in empathy, in a profound understanding of what it meant to live in a world that doesn't always have your back. It was the same drive that had pushed her through law school, that had kept her going when everything seemed stacked against her. And now, as she faced down one of the most powerful figures in the legal world, it wasn't just her knowledge that would carry her through this, it was the fire that had fueled her since the beginning. The fire that wouldn't allow her to back down, no matter the cost. But it wasn't just her knowledge that would carry her through this, something far deeper was about to unfold. The air in the room feels electric, charged with anticipation as Judge Posner leans forward in his chair, his expression cold, his eyes locked on Representative Jasmine Crockett. He's been circling her like a predator, and now he senses blood in the water. The initial respect for her composure has worn off, replaced with an unmistakable arrogance. "You're young, Miss Crockett," Posner begins, his voice dripping with condescension. "You speak with such conviction, but you must understand that the law isn't a playground for idealistic notions. It's a finely tuned system, grounded in decades, centuries, of precedent. Can you even begin to comprehend that? Or are you too busy making headlines to understand the law the way it was meant to be understood?" The room tightens, the murmurs of the audience growing as Posner's tone sharpens. The implication is clear: Crockett is a rookie, a political upstart who doesn't have the intellectual heft to challenge him. His reputation, built over decades of meticulous legal reasoning, looms large in the debate. But Crockett doesn't flinch. She's heard it all before. The insults, the doubts. She's been underestimated her whole life. So, she takes a deep breath, her voice unwavering as she responds, "Your Honor, I understand that you have decades of experience. But experience doesn't always equate to wisdom. The law may be rooted in precedent, but that doesn't mean it can't evolve to reflect the needs of the people it's meant to serve." Posner's lips curl into a smug smile, his eyes glinting with disdain. "And here we go, the needs of the people. How charming. I'm sure your voters love hearing that. But that's not what the law is. The law is about objectivity, consistency. You can't just bend it to fit whatever feels right in the moment, Ms. Crockett. The insult stings, but Crockett stands tall, her shoulders square. She's not here to play by the same rules that Posner follows. She's here to rewrite the rules entirely. Objectivity, she repeats, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. You think the law is objective? Maybe in an ideal world. But when you've seen what I've seen, when you've lived the way I've lived, objectivity looks a lot like oppression. Your definition of consistency doesn't leave room for the voices of the marginalized, for the ones who never had a seat at the table. So no, I'm not here to play your game. I'm here to change it. There's a palpable shift in the room. The tension between them is no longer just a clash of intellect, it's a battle of wills. Crockett's words are simple, direct, and unyielding. Posner, the legal giant who has spent a lifetime shaping American jurisprudence, is suddenly confronted with a force he cannot control, a force that isn't intimidated by his reputation, isn't swayed by his years of experience. Posner leans back in his chair, chuckling under his breath, as though dismissing her words as naive, even juvenile. You really believe that, don't you? You think you have the answer to all of America's problems? To all the complexities that the law is supposed to address? You're still a child playing in the sandbox, Ms. Crockett. You've barely been in office for more than a few years, and already you think you can rewrite the foundation of this country's legal system? It's laughable. The room holds its breath. His words sting, but Crockett's response comes quickly, a sharp retort that cuts through the condescension. I don't need to rewrite the legal system, Your Honor. I need to expose how it's failing people. The truth is, the system you're so proud of has been broken for generations. It's been a system that upholds privilege and power while silencing the very people who need it most. And I'm not afraid to stand up and say that. Posner's face hardens, the smile disappearing from his lips. The audience feels the temperature rise. His attacks grow sharper, more personal. His tone no longer carries the veneer of respect. He's no longer debating the law, he's mocking her, belittling her very existence in the arena of power. Tell me, Miss Crockett, he sneers, how many of your colleagues have asked you for your legal advice? How many have turned to you for insight on how to navigate the complexities of the law? Your inexperience is glaring. You may have a loud voice in Washington, but in the halls of the judiciary, your opinions don't carry the weight of history. Maybe one day, when you've earned your stripes, people will listen to you. But for now, you're just another voice trying to make a name for yourself. His words hang heavy in the air, a challenge and an insult wrapped into one. The audience watches, silent, waiting for Crockett's response. She feels the weight of his words, but something inside her refuses to buckle. She knows who she is. She knows why she's here. And she knows exactly how to answer. Her response is calm, deliberate, but undeniably powerful. Maybe you're right, Judge. Maybe I'm not as experienced as you. But you know what? Experience doesn't always equate to wisdom. The world is changing, and you're still clinging to a system that serves the few while ignoring the many. You see the law as a static, infallible thing. I see it as a tool to right the wrongs of the past. The room feels the shift. This is no longer a debate. It's a battle of ideologies, a battle for the future of America itself. And just when it seemed like Posner had won the upper hand, Crockett made one statement that shook the room. The room hangs on the precipice of silence, the weight of Posner's last words still vibrating in the air. It's as if the debate has reached a boiling point, where every word, every pause, could either spill over into chaos or ignite a shift of monumental proportions. Judge Posner, a man who has spent decades defining the boundaries of legal discourse, is standing in front of a woman who refuses to stay within those lines. The tension is palpable, but Representative Jasmine Crockett's resolve only grows firmer. She doesn't respond immediately. Instead, she stands there for a moment, her eyes steady, her breathing measured. This is not a time for hasty replies or emotional outbursts. She needs to do more than just answer Posner. She needs to expose the cracks in the system he spent a lifetime defending. The audience feels the shift in energy. The room knows this is the moment. The crescendo of the debate, the high-stakes showdown between a seasoned judge and a young firebrand, has come to a head. All eyes are on Crockett, waiting for her next move. And then, in a voice calm but resolute, Crockett speaks. "Judge Posner," she begins, her words crisp and deliberate, each one landing with precision. "You talk about experience. You talk about precedent and stability. But what you don't see is that this country has evolved far beyond the narrow lens through which you view it. The world has changed, but you continue to cling to a legal system that was never designed for the people you claim to protect. You speak of objectivity, but that objectivity was forged in a time that excluded entire communities. It was created by a system that prioritized wealth and power over justice and fairness. A system where people who looked like me, and millions of others, were nothing more than an afterthought." The room falls even quieter, the silence now charged with anticipation. She's not just talking about legal theory anymore, she's talking about reality. The reality that Posner, for all his brilliance, has never truly understood. "You see," Crockett continues, her tone growing more confident, "the law isn't just about theory or precedent. It's about the people it affects. It's about the woman who can't afford her medicine because the pharmaceutical companies you defend are price gouging. It's about the child whose future is shaped by an education system that's rigged to fail her because of the zip code she was born in. And yes, it's about the black man who sits in prison today for a crime he didn't commit because the system you hold so dear is built on a foundation of racial bias." The crowd shifts, murmurs building like a swell of rising energy. Crockett's words are cutting through the fog of legal jargon and ideological rhetoric, and they're landing squarely in the heart of the room. This isn't just about the law. This is about what the law has done to real people. And Crockett is showing everyone exactly what's wrong with it. Posner, still sitting behind the bench, squints at her. His lips purse, his eyes narrowing, but he says nothing. The arrogance in his posture remains, but the facade of invincibility cracks just a little. Crockett isn't rattled. She presses on. "You act as if the law is a perfect mechanism, a machine that operates without bias, without error. But the truth is, Judge Posner, the law is nothing more than a tool that can be wielded for justice or oppression, depending on who's holding it. And for too long, it's been in the hands of people who have never had to look at it through the eyes of those who are suffering." She lets the words linger, and for a moment, it seems as if time itself has slowed. The energy in the room is at a fever pitch, the air thick with anticipation. Everyone is waiting for her to deliver the final blow. And they know it's coming. "I'm not here to tear down the law, Judge," Crockett says, her voice unwavering, "but I am here to say that the law as it stands today is failing us. It's failing the people you've sworn to serve, and it's failing this country. Your objectivity hasn't served the black community. It hasn't served the working class. It hasn't served the immigrant families, the families struggling to survive while the rich get richer. It's served those who already have power, and that's the problem." With every word, Crockett's message grows sharper. She's not just answering Posner's criticism. She's rewriting the narrative entirely. Where Posner saw inexperience, Crockett reveals the truth, a system designed for the elite that needs to be radically overhauled to serve the people. And as she speaks, the tension in the room reaches its breaking point. Then, she delivers the final, devastating line that leaves the room in stunned silence. "Judge Posner, your world is crumbling, and you don't even see it. You're fighting for a system that doesn't exist anymore, if it ever truly did. You've spent your life clinging to a fantasy, and in doing so, you've missed the most important part of the law, its responsibility to people. To real people. Not just the ones with the right connections and the right pedigree." The room erupts. Gasps echo through the audience, and for a fleeting moment, even Posner's confident posture falters. He leans forward, but no retort comes. His silence is deafening. The mic drop has been made. Crockett's words have hit their mark with devastating precision. In the back of the room, cameras flash as the crowd rises, a mixture of applause and murmurs filling the air. On social media, the hashtag Crockett vs. Posner begins to trend. Supporters rally behind her, sharing clips of the moment, spreading her words across the nation. But while Posner was left scrambling, the impact of Crockett's words was felt far beyond that room. The moment Crockett delivered her final mic drop line, the room may have gone silent, but the world outside it erupted in a frenzy. Social media platforms, already buzzing with the heat of the debate, suddenly exploded. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok were flooded with clips, memes, and soundbites. Hashtag Crockett wins began trending within minutes, a tidal wave of support crashing across the digital landscape. Political commentators, influencers, and everyday users were sharing the pivotal moment, dissecting every word, every pause, and every subtle shift in Posner's unshakable demeanor. The viral video of her rebuttal, calm yet unyielding, rapidly spread, garnering millions of views within hours. The hashtags didn't just trend, they ignited a movement. Hashtag Posner defeated quickly followed, as pundits and users alike reacted to the fall of a judicial titan, one who had seemed untouchable for decades. The tables had turned in front of the world, and the social media sphere became a battleground of opinions. Support for Crockett poured in from all sides, young progressives, marginalized communities, and even those disillusioned with the old guard of politics. Memes featuring Crockett's line, "You're fighting for a system that doesn't exist anymore," were shared millions of times, paired with fiery captions and quotes from everyday people reflecting on their own struggles within a system that had failed them. Prominent politicians quickly took sides. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "Crockett's words were a clarion call to the future of politics. She is the voice of a new generation, a generation that will no longer sit in the shadows of outdated legal and political systems." Hashtag Crockett wins. Bernie Sanders, too, echoed his support, calling Crockett's rebuttal a masterclass in truth-telling and courage. This is what leadership looks like. The rallying cries weren't just limited to left-wing progressives, however. Across the aisle, even some centrist Democrats began to reassess the nature of the judicial system Posner had so long represented. They called Crockett's words a bold challenge to the status quo, a challenge that echoed far beyond the confines of the debate. But not everyone was in awe. Some of the old-guard legal analysts and commentators, accustomed to defending the sanctity of institutions like Posner's, came out swinging, determined to salvage their idol's reputation. Jasmine Crockett may have won the crowd, but she didn't win the argument, one conservative legal analyst wrote. The law isn't about emotional appeals or political correctness, it's about facts and structure. Crockett's lack of legal experience was evident in her misguided approach. But those voices, though loud, seemed to lose their strength in the face of a tidal wave of support for Crockett. The public's response was visceral. She wasn't just speaking to a room full of politicians and pundits. She was speaking to the millions of people who felt forgotten, overlooked, and crushed under the weight of a legal system that had long seemed designed to favor the powerful. Crockett's message had struck a chord. It wasn't just about reforming the law, it was about reshaping it entirely, building it in a way that served everyone, not just those who had historically held the reins of power. Television networks and digital news outlets were quick to cover the aftermath. The headlines weren't about Posner's decades of rulings, they were about Crockett's powerful challenge to a system that had for too long operated on the fringes of justice. A new champion for the people, one headline read. Jasmine Crockett slays judicial titan, another blared. The coverage was swift and intense, reshaping the conversation about power, the law, and the role of the judiciary in the modern age. Even the public's relationship with Posner was changing. A figure once revered for his sharp legal mind, Posner was now the subject of debate, not about his intellectual prowess, but about his place in a society that was evolving faster than he seemed able or willing to keep up with. Commentators began to question his legacy, once solidified as a beacon of legal conservatism. Posner's response to Crockett revealed a fundamental flaw in his worldview, a respected legal scholar wrote. The law is not static, and Crockett reminded us of the need to evolve with the times. The reverberations of the debate weren't confined to just the legal world, they reached deep into the fabric of public discourse. In communities across the nation, from Chicago to New York to Los Angeles, people were talking. At local coffee shops, at dinner tables, on trains and buses, the debate wasn't just a political spectacle. It was personal. People began to feel like they had a voice, that perhaps it wasn't just the powerful and the elite who could challenge systems of inequality. The media landscape shifted, too. News outlets, desperate for a story that resonated with the public's growing disillusionment with the status quo, began shifting their focus. No longer were they just covering the mechanics of the legal system, now they were digging deeper into the conversations Crockett had sparked. How had Posner's arrogance clouded his judgment? How had Crockett, despite her relatively short time in politics, come to embody the very changes that the country so desperately needed? Even more revealing was the impact on Crockett herself. Within days, her profile as a rising political star skyrocketed. She went from being a relatively unknown freshman representative to one of the most discussed figures in American politics. Her social media followers grew exponentially. Political donors, once hesitant to back a newcomer, were now flooding her campaign with support. It wasn't just about winning a debate, it was about positioning herself as a legitimate force for change in Washington. Her message had resonated, not just with the progressive wing, but with those who were tired of the same old politics and the same old power structures. But in the midst of all this chaos, Crockett's true message began to resonate far beyond social media. The world, it seemed, was ready for her voice, the voice of someone who wasn't content to just win debates but was committed to reshaping the very foundations of the country. As her star continued to rise, so too did the realization that this moment had not just altered the debate, it had altered the course of American politics. In the aftermath of that debate, as the dust settled and the world digested the implications of Crockett's stunning rebuttal, one thing became abundantly clear: this wasn't just about a clash between two legal minds, it was about something much larger. Representative Jasmine Crockett had not just won a debate, she had delivered a profound message about the very nature of leadership, justice, and what it means to serve the people. As the days passed and the conversation continued to ripple across social media, it became evident that her words were more than just a tactical win. They were a declaration of the values that she believed should guide American politics and society as a whole: empathy, equity, and truth. Her message was not a new one, it had been heard before by those on the margins, the underserved, and the forgotten, but Crockett made it resonate on a scale that was impossible to ignore. In her final remarks during that fateful debate, Crockett had distilled her beliefs into something simple yet powerful: true leadership is not about playing by the old rules. It's about courage, integrity, and standing firm in the face of injustice. For too long, political leadership had been defined by power, wealth, and a dedication to maintaining the status quo. It had been about knowing the right people, following the right precedents, and adhering to the same tired norms that had failed millions of people in this country. But Crockett's leadership was different. She had shown that leadership wasn't about pedigree or experience, it was about the willingness to fight for what was right, even when the odds were stacked against you. True leadership, as Crockett embodied it, was about understanding the needs of the people, about hearing their stories, and fighting to make their lives better. This was not a leadership that existed in the halls of power or behind closed doors of the elite, it was the kind of leadership that came from the streets, from the communities, from those who had been overlooked and pushed aside by a system that had grown complacent. Crockett's words weren't just directed at Judge Posner, they were directed at everyone who had ever been told that their voice didn't matter, that their struggles didn't count, that their pain wasn't important enough to be acknowledged. And in that moment, the country began to realize that what Crockett was offering was not just a political ideology, it was a moral awakening. She had reframed what it meant to be a public servant. No longer was it about adhering to a dry, impersonal legal theory that served the few. It was about embodying the values of truth, justice, and, most importantly, empathy. She had shown the world that leadership is about seeing the people you serve, not as constituents or voters, but as human beings whose lives, needs, and aspirations are at the heart of every decision. Her challenge to Posner's rigid worldview was not just a critique of his legal philosophy, it was a challenge to the very foundation of a system that too often ignored the voices of the people in favor of maintaining its own power. Her defense of the people wasn't just an argument, it was a moral imperative. And in that, Crockett transcended the moment of the debate. She became the face of a new kind of leadership, one that wasn't afraid to fight for equity, one that didn't allow the barriers of tradition or power to define what was possible. For Crockett, the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. She knew that this victory, this moment of clarity, was a step towards something much larger. It was a reflection of the collective energy of the people who had been silenced for too long, and it was a rallying cry for a future that was no longer dictated by the old guard of politics and legal institutions. It was about creating a new world where empathy and truth weren't just ideals, but guiding principles. As her rise continued, more and more people rallied behind her, politicians, activists, and everyday citizens who felt her message resonating deep within them. She wasn't just a politician, she was the voice of the future, a future where justice and the people were always at the center of decision-making. She had shattered the illusion that politics was for the elite and reminded the country that real change comes from the people who care about it most. For those watching, her words echoed far beyond that courtroom. They reminded everyone that leadership wasn't about what you had or who you knew, it was about what you did with the power you had, and how deeply you cared about the people you were meant to serve. And as Crockett's journey continues, the question remains, what will the future hold for this new wave of leadership? Will it be a fleeting moment, or the beginning of a movement that changes the course of American politics forever? In a time when so many are desperate for change, Jasmine Crockett's rise is a beacon, a signal that the future belongs not to the powerful few, but to the many who have the courage to fight for a better tomorrow. What we witnessed in that courtroom wasn't just a debate, it was a defining moment for America. Representative Jasmine Crockett didn't just stand up for herself, she stood up for the people. For the unheard voices, for the marginalized, for those who've been silenced by a system that too often serves the powerful, not the people. Her unwavering defense of justice, her commitment to truth, and her relentless fight for empathy and equity weren't just words, they were a call to action. Crockett's challenge to Judge Posner wasn't just a critique of one man's legal philosophy, it was a reminder that true leadership is about serving the people, not the system. It's about recognizing that laws must evolve to meet the needs of the people they serve, not just the powerful elites who've controlled them for too long. Leadership is about having the courage to stand up, speak the truth, and fight for a better tomorrow. And now, the question falls to all of us, what kind of future do we want? Will we stand by as the status quo continues to fail the people, or will we rise and demand something different? The change we need starts with us, with the choices we make, with the actions we take. Crockett has shown us the way forward, a path of empathy, justice, and leadership that values people over power. It's up to us to carry that torch. So, join us in the fight for a better tomorrow. Subscribe, share this message, and be a part of the movement for change. We are the future. Together, we can make it brighter. Let's rise and reshape the world, one action at a time.